Chag Sameach to everybody, and it's wonderful to be back in New York after a whirlwind tour, almost around half the world, and just to report back to you that we're all alive and well around the world, and all pulling together to make these new revolutionary concepts come alive. From the Zohar we have learned that when a tzaddik or a Kabbalist leaves this world, on the day of their departure, the day that they choose to leave, and that expression again is found in the Zohar, that when Rabbi Shimon chose the date of his leaving behind his family, his friends, and all of the peoples of the world, that he would return each and every single year on that particular day. And I've always been amazed at this idea of the Yom Hilulah, as it is referred to in Aramaic, because Yom Hilulah is referred to as the day of joy. And very few of us, and certainly those of us not involved in Kabbalah, cannot fathom an idea that when a dear departed relative leaves, that it is a day of rejoicing. We all feel the pain, the lack that this father, mother, brother, child no longer is there to be spoken to, no longer there to share some comfort with us. And it is strange that we can consider a day as this evening, the leaving of the presence of Moses, feeling that presence, and no longer to avail ourselves of his presence and refer to it as a Yom Hilulah, as a day of joy, a day of rejoicing. And this is the case with all righteous, with all of the Kabbalists. But in this particular case concerning Moses, and I'd like to share this reading with you from the Zohar, because as we have learned in the classes, that the mere reading of a Zohar, the mere reading of any of the works of Rabbi Isaac Luria, just the simple scanning of its words, achieves for us, and it's incredible because it happens so often that we've come to accept this idea, for there is no better teacher than our own personal experiences, that the reading of a Zohar will raise our consciousness, permit a higher level of awareness, meaning that we now have the ability to see the same things in another light, in another dimension, a more broader dimension, a more profound dimension, a deeper interpretation, a deeper understanding of the very same thing that I may have observed last year, 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. But so be it, and therefore I'd like to begin this evening's tapping of this awesome energy that is available for us this evening. I read from, and not by coincidence, and that is only because we are in a leap year, meaning that there are two Adars. There is Adar 1 and Adar 2, an extra month this year, that this particular section that I'm going to read to you belongs to this week. It is found, that which I'm going to read to you now, this very awesome revelation of the Zohar, is found in Parshat Trumah. And this week's reading is Parshat Trumah. In other words, the effect of the week upon us is clearly defined. What we can expect as to the influence of Parshat Trumah, and therefore sections that may not be appropriately found in this week's Parsha. As an example, the passing away of Moses. The actual recording of Moses' departure is found in the very final section of Deuteronomy. And that will take place on Simchat Torah, when it is read. And yet here we are in Parshat Trumah. In Parshat Trumah, middle of the winter, and we are going to read about the passing of Moses. Now, why shouldn't Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar, have included this particular section that deals with the departure of Moses and place it in Vizot HaBracha, in the last section of the Torah, in the last book of the 5 books of Moses, in which there is specifically recorded the passing away of Moses. And yet, the Zohar finds it necessary to include the idea of Moses leaving in this week's parasha, because he passed away on Zayin Adar. And Zayin Adar this year is found in Parshat Trumah. And so when the Rabbi Shimon compiled the Zohar, this was not merely a compendium of information that would follow the strict chronological order of the Torah, because it is there to teach us, as Rabbi Shimon has stated on many occasions, that the 5 books of Moses is a manual. The 5 books of Moses is humankind's possession as a user manual for an automobile, for the purchase of an air conditioner or a computer or whatever other appliance. It always is accompanied by a user's manual. And as I have repeatedly stated over the years, where God is the user manual for life's journey. That if I have a problem today, where do I go to find the answers? If I have a problem with a computer, you turn to page 42 or 48. If you have a problem with your automobile, it tells you what page to turn to, so as possibly to eliminate the problem. Where is this user's manual for us in our daily journey of life's existence? And the answer is the Torah. But where in the Torah can we find some of the answers to our daily problems? It doesn't seem or appear to exist in the Torah. For the Torah seems to appear to be a compendium of historical facts and a couple of religious connotations, precepts, commandments, etc. And yet, we are referring to a user's manual. And therefore, the answer was, the Torah is completely coded. The Torah can never and will never be understood nor seen unless we have the Kabbalah, the Zohar, that can illuminate the internal meaning, the concealed, the couched in abstruse language, and have an interpretation revealed. It is no different. The Torah is no different than these signs along your highway in the evening, that without your headlights, these signs which clearly delineate, clearly direct us as to where we should be going. However, if those headlights are not operable, we may pass that exit. We may never reach our destination because we need the illumination of those signs by those headlights. So too, the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, is completely abstruse and coded, says the Zohar. And it is only through the illumination by the Zohar that suddenly the Torah becomes alive. And therefore, the fact that chronologically the Torah mentions the death of Moses, and I'm using that word only because some of us may not understand clearly as to what I shortly will explain. So I'm using the word, the death of Moses. That while it is mentioned in the Torah at the end of the 5 books of Moses, nevertheless, Moses did pass on in the month of Adar, Zayin Adar, tonight in particular. And so, in this infinite wisdom of the Zohar, the mentioning of the departure in Parshat Trumah is exactly when Moses literally left this world. And so I now continue to read from the Zohar. The Tanya, and we have learned. Amar Rabbi Shimon, said Rabbi Shimon, Moshe lo met. 3 words. 3 words that should revolutionize the consciousness and thinking of every human being. Moses did not die. But it clearly states in that last section of Deuteronomy that Moses died. And here the Zohar begins this section in Parshat Trumah, referring to the death anniversary of Moses. For the Zohar was revealed by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai 1,400 years after Moses had left this world. And the Zohar says, no, Moshe lo met. Ve'im toma harei katuv vayamat sham Moshe. And the Zohar, not being ashamed nor being afraid to raise questions, as we have learned repeatedly in Kabbalah, that we demand that each and every student ask questions. There is no answer, so it is written. Those few words, so it is written, does not appear, nor does it exist, nor does it belong in the lexicon of Kabbalah. If you have questions, as you have questions in your own daily lives, so too must you question the heart of universal knowledge, the Torah. And so the Zohar raises that question. But it does say in Deuteronomy, the last section, V'zot habracha of Deuteronomy, that Moses died there. So how can I, Rabbi Shimon, tapping this infinite wisdom of the light force of God, say that Moses did not die? V'kein b'kol makom koreh b'tzadikim mitah. And so too is it mentioned by all of the other righteous individuals mentioned in the Torah, says they died. And yet, the Zohar in another section, referring to Jacob, the patriarch, says, Jacob, like Isaac before him, and Abraham before him, did not die. And therefore, says the Zohar, Mahu Mitah. Oh, what a question. You would think that Rabbi Shimon was living in the 21st century. He says, what is death? You ask a physician, what is death? It is one of the most hottest debatable topics. When is there death? Well, some have decided when you have the no brain waves, blank, straight line, no waves, death has set in. And others have come to other conclusions as to what is death. But nothing has been confirmed as to what is to be considered a deceased person. There is no unanimity on that subject. And therefore the Zohar, 2,000 years ago, asked, what is death? Well, a person doesn't move anymore. Well, I think on an occasion I would mention about this fellow who they were burying, and the coffin was in the ground, and suddenly they hear someone yelling from inside, please leave me out. He had gone into this state of an animated suspension that appeared to be death, and he wasn't dead. So we're not really certain. We're not really certain, especially the joke is about Jerusalem. You know, in Jerusalem, when someone passes away during the day, you don't bury him the next day. You've got to bury him immediately. For it says in the Torah that a corpse should not remain overnight in Jerusalem, for whatever reason. Maybe the person didn't die. Maybe he's in a catatonic state of death, and he has not died. But in any event, Rabbi Shimon asks, Mahu Mitah. And what is his answer? 2 words. You imagine an answer on such a profound subject? Mitzidenu ken. From our point of view, that person is dead. What does he mean? Aval mitzad ha'elyonim, from the point of view of the deceased, Adaraba, shenitosaf lo chaim. There has been an additional life imbued in this individual. And so in, I believe, Miracles, Mysteries, and Prayer, I try to explain to some extent just what does the Zohar mean? And humorously, I stated that when that coffin is being covered with the dust of the earth, the individual, the deceased, no longer is visible to us. But you know what? At the same time, we are no longer visible to the deceased. Who died? The deceased may think we died because we are no longer here. We observe the deceased as no longer being here. But who? And according to Einstein's theory of relativity, everything is really relative. So who has really passed on? But in addition, says the Zohar, while we may be undergoing a living existence full of despair, full of problems, full of pain, full of suffering, to classify our life's experience as existing. But, says the Zohar, when the righteous have passed through that door of death, they then expose the idea that death is only an illusion. For when does an individual know that death has not had the trappings that we have placed with it, that we have assumed comes along with death? Is only after the person has died, disappeared from our presence, those who remain behind, and now wherever that person is, in the ground or wherever, now realizes that what was assumed, or what he or she may have even assumed, was undergoing a transfer from one existence to another, was really an illusion, that they never died. So death is the doorpost. Death is the gateway to the truth about death. I hope I've made myself clear. It is very profound. The Zohar is profound. And this is the definition as to why Moses doesn't die. That Moses' presence is here with us this evening. However, also cautions the Zohar Ein mitat lui bo ve'ino met. Death does not depend on Moses, as it was in the case of Yaakov. Shahaya bo emuna shlema. That if we do not believe in a concept referred to as immortality, if we do not believe that death is illusionary, then death actually takes place. Because death is a purely conscious feature, depending on how we consider the idea, on how we reflect upon someone who has departed. For those of us this evening who firmly believe that immortality, as Rabbi Shimon just stated, that's an individual as Moses. When it says that he died in Deuteronomy, it is the people who saw the disappearance of Moses from their midst. They were the ones who believed that Moses no longer existed. And for them, says the Zohar, Moses does not exist. However, for those who understand what happened on Mount Sinai. And as we have explained the concept of Mount Sinai in its true Kabbalistic interpretation, that it was not an event that made Jews become a nation. It was not an event that brought about the world's first religion. It was not as commonly been accepted as the Ten Commandments. For in Hebrew, there is no such word as 10 Commandments. There is Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 utterances that on Mount Sinai, when Moses channeled these 10 utterances, consisting of Hebrew letters, consisting of Hebrew words, encompassing and embracing a verse, that these letters, words, and verses were channeling that never-ending flow of a DNA of the light force of God. What do I mean by a never-ending flow of the DNA force of the light force of God? Cut our nails, cut our hair, grows back. Our bodies are always being rejuvenated every 7 years when we're younger. Unfortunately, when we become adulterated, suddenly the process begins to slow down. But the force of the light force of God being channeled through a DNA which would continuously rejuvenate the body is what is actual and what we have experienced. But then again, we also observe around us the idea of cemeteries, of hospitals, etc. So someone does have a bad heart. DNA, are you still there? Trouble is, we forgot to ask, are you still there? We're assuming that when we undergo a problem, a physical problem, a mental problem, that God has forsaken us, that God no longer is there to provide us with the answers. And the answers are simple. Whatever that problem is should not be there, because the presence of God is continuously making its presence felt, except we have lost the consciousness that everything around us is immortal, but have fallen into this consciousness that things must come to an end. An incredible concept. But for those of us this evening, and unfortunately, outside of the centers around the world, Moses has died. Yes, some synagogues, maybe around the world, they'll take into account that poor Moses passed away and we're without our leader. But for those of us this evening who want to tap that raw, naked energy of Moses as the channel that on Mount Sinai, when he delivered the light force of God, into a viable, a very effective force that the Jew who's chosen to bring this concept to the world, the Jew who has this vehicle, this vessel of an ability to tap the infinite, endless stream of a DNA to rejuvenate and never permit chaos in our lives, in whatever form it comes. That Moses, who can embrace the full effect, the full force of the light force of God, that once it becomes operative within our systems, whether it is within the physical body, whether it's in our environment, wherever we have drawn this presence of Moses, then chaos no longer is a reality. Despite the fact that there is something known as Maxwell's second law of thermodynamics, which I don't understand to begin with, but all he says is that everything must come to an end. And it will come to an end, and chaos will remain supreme as long as we accept in our consciousness the idea that Moses died. For with Moses died that vessel, died that channel by which we could have had the ability, as the Jew on Mount Sinai 3,400 years ago had achieved that level of the removal of chaos in whatever form it may have presented itself. If not for the incident of the golden calf, when they said, let us make a god, what did they want? Why did they need a god? Because Moses wasn't there. So what? So what if Moses wasn't there? But the fact that they thought that Moses no longer would become a viable channel for them, then they had assumed that Moses had died. And therein lies the problem. They assumed that Moses had died. And by that very consciousness of assumption that Moses had died, and now they said, let's make ourselves a god, kind of a god, a golden calf. Because what they did retain was the idea, and they did create a golden calf, a speaking, living golden calf. This was not just a golden image, a golden idol of a calf. It was a living calf. They had the ability of mind over matter to create in front of their eyes, take gold, imbue it with a living spirit. For this they had captured on Mount Sinai. But what they had forgotten on Mount Sinai is that death came to an end. And therefore, understand that Moses no longer could die as well. But that was the work of Satan. That is the work of Satan to this very moment, to convince us that we do not have the ability to control the affairs of our lives. And we sit there as sitting ducks, waiting for that ultimate, eventual date when chaos will set in. Whether it be the ultimate of death, the acceptance of death as something very real, or whether throughout our lives there is just one bundle filled with constant pain and suffering. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. The Zohar continues. Mikan nishmash Yaakov lo met. And now he is discussing this idea about Jacob, whom also the Torah ascribes as having died. And yet, the Zohar says no, Jacob did not die either. Shekatuv ki itcha ani. For I am always with you. Ashrei chelko she'adono amar lo ken. Ki iti ata. For I am always with you. Now I know there are those who understand that while the body may be mortal, of course the soul remains immortal. But what the Zohar is referring to is not the idea that our souls continue to exist far beyond the body's ability to sustain it. Nevertheless, as we understand that this hand cannot raise itself or decide to raise itself or lower itself unless there is an internal force that guides and directs every movement of our body. There is that force, that godlike feature within us that never dies. Most of the peoples in the world accept the idea of an immortal soul. But my question to you this evening is, the soul can be understood to be immortal, but mind over matter, as demonstrated by this incident of the hand going up and down, guided by this internal metaphysical force known as the soul, reigns over this physical matter. Why cannot this soul maintain and sustain a physical body? Why should the body die, I ask? But we have accepted that which appears before our eyes, cemeteries, and other forms of indication and evidence that the body is mortal. That all can be changed. That all is undergoing change. And if you want to know the effect, of what our teachings are having upon the entire world, at this very moment that we are discussing immortality, the removal of chaos from our lives with the assistance of the man who brought us the concept of immortality, that man who is present here this evening, who is crying out to us, control your lives. For when the Jews were faced with the dilemma of a Red Sea in front of them when they left Egypt, and with the Egyptians behind, coming in for the kill, and what would a normal person do under those circumstances? Pray to God. Like we all pray to God in time of need. And what was God's response? And please never forget it. God's response to Moses was, tell those Jews, Ma titzak elai. Why are they praying to me? Well, to whom else? And God says, you pray to your God. You are God. You have the capacity to act as God. I taught you I've given you the methodology. I've given you the system by which you can control your destiny. I've given you the ability to reign over all physical matter, which means the body or the Red Sea. And he says, jump into the Red Sea. Well, we don't need God to tell us to jump into the Red Sea. But that's what God answered. Tell them ye so. Jump into the water, for the water must split. The ones who split the Red Sea were the Jews, my friends. Contrary to 3,400 years of misinterpretation, says the Zohar. It was the Jew who split the Red Sea, for it is the Jew who has the ability, the knowledge. And this knowledge must be given to all peoples of the world. No different than when the Torah was given on Mount Sinai. Was it given only to the Jews? Then you'll have to explain to me why the Torah was translated into the 70 languages of all peoples of the world. Everyone was involved in that event. Everyone has the ability. Unfortunately, it has been only the Jew that received that instruction. Today, we have arrived at that information. Today, we know the codes of how to tap Moses. This is why Moses wants to be here with us this evening. Because we are prepared to accept the idea that he is a living Moses. And with that, we shall remain a living people. Chag Sameach to all of you.